Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. It's a beautiful day, so I am grateful, we are grateful for your decision to spend an hour with us in a darkened room. But we're here really, we're really here to celebrate Design Miami.LA. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic that this event is happening. It's come together and it's absolutely astounding. We're very happy to be part of it, and thank you for coming. So we're going to talk a little bit about notions of authenticity. The title is Authenticity, Identity and Image, or Image and Identity. So just by means of introduction, my name is Simon Andrews. I'm based in London. I've been connected with the Design Miami team since the very beginning. I work independently as an advisor, but also a curator and a writer. And in this talk, we're just going to explore definitions, interpretations of what we mean by authenticity. Lee, would you like to?
I'm Lee Mindel. I'm an architect, and I do everything that Simon says. That's the game we're going to play.
Yeah.
But I'd like to start out with actually a wonderful quote by Elio Saarinen from Cranbrook. He moved from Helsinki with his father to create a kind of neo-Bauhaus in Michigan. And I think what he said is so thoughtful. It's always design a thing by considering in its next larger context, a chair in a room in a house in an environment in a city plan. If we all listen to that, we'd have a much better place. So we're going to now start with this very interesting Rietveld.
So really, we wanted to start with Gerrit Rietveld, the Dutch architect and designer. This is an interior from the early 1920s. Rietveld is interesting because we can argue that really this is the first manifestation of art and design coming together to create a new form of expression where one cannot easily define what is art, what is architecture, and what is furniture. They have somehow fused into something that is a very revolutionary identity. So we're using this as a starting point because the world that we are in today, it's very easy to apply definitions to what we think should be one thing or another, but really they're all part of the same holistic whole. So we're going to skip to the next image.
But this fusion, I think, is so interesting because if you take Mondrian in painting and you take the De Stijl movement in Theodor van Doesburg, it all translate. If you have the love child of the two, it actually becomes this Rietveld.
Yeah, exactly. And the object of focus here is really this sideboard. This is a sideboard designed by Rietveld in 1919. It was created for the architect Piet Elling. It didn't survive very long. The original was burnt in a fire in the early 1920s, and the only element that survived was the drawer that ended up in the Stedelijk Museum. And from that drawer, Rietveld, together with his cabinet maker, Gerard van de Groningen, made two examples in Rietveld's lifetime. Both were executed in the 1950s, one 1951 for the Stedelijk Museum, and the other example that we have here in the in situ room shot was created for the British architect Brian Houston in 1958. So I think it's useful to just focus on this for a moment because, as we've suggested, this is the manifestation of art, design, structure, interior, architecture, all as one thing. We're talking about authenticity, so the original is 1919 to the early 1920s, but these are also original. They're also authentic because they are created by the same cabinet maker under the direction of the architect. And that image in particular, it's a photograph taken in Brian Houston's home in North London, and I love the way that he's just using the piece of furniture. One is in the museum in the Stedelijk, the other one is here, and it's just being used and patinated and worn and gathering all kinds of objects and just becoming an integral part of the architect's domestic interior. So just a starting point for a conversation.
And then this is a tale of four cities, actually. I don't know if people know who Mr. Fornasetti was. I actually met him in the Brera when he was still alive in Milan, but this is the metaphysical room, which kind of draws from Piranesi and Escher and all the three-dimensional experiments the Italians were doing. And he worked with Gio Ponti, another fusion of art and architecture in becoming a decorative arts. But it began in Milan, and then it went to London, and then I saw it in New York. I'm going to drop a name now. We were doing Sting's apartment in New York, and he had a window facing Central Park and a window facing the river, but the longitudinal things, he was sharing a party wall with another movie star, star. So we thought if we could split this metaphysical room, being so authentic, it could create kind of windows into an oblique wall, and you'll see the actual integration of the things that we built in the field relate to the actual things in the Fornasetti screen done in segments. You see the stair and the railing, so it's life imitates art, art imitates life, but it really informed it. And it was divided into a triptych, which you can see even the tables echo the design in the Fornasetti screen. And the irony of the pillars comes from the Shakespearean kind of theater, given Sting's background. And then you can see the enfilade as it takes you from the Central Park to the Hudson River. And we then did various colorations of it for different songs Sting did. So we could do it as it floated. And then they were moving, and we put it up at auction, and we were working on a project in San Francisco that had an Italianate turret, which we were going to rebuild. And I did the circumference of the metaphysical room. It was exactly the circumference of the turret. So we felt like a foster parent. We got it from London to New York, then we placed it in New York, and now I'm going tomorrow to San Francisco to supervise the installation and the construction of this. So you can see this is a rendering. Now we extruded what Aponte did in 3 floors, informing the actual components of his original work, the authentic work, but making reality bookshelves and a library. Here are some drawings of it. That's a drawing in the rotunda now. So the kind of appropriation from all these different places and respecting the authenticity and of it really informed this project. There's a rendering of it looking up above. You know about Mr. Fornasetti very well.
Yeah, Fornasetti's, I mean, he was apprenticed to Gioponti. I mean, Gioponti is one of the legendary Italian architects, really responsible for creating a modern identity for Italy from the, I suppose, the mid-1930s onwards. He was a very eloquent and successful patron, enlisted much young talent, Fornasetti being one at the time. Chiesa would be another. He collaborated, Paolo De Poli actually, for enamel work is another one. So he was a very influential figure that attracted talent and helped foster talent to create a new identity. Now, what I think is interesting about Lee's project here with these panels is that the objects remain authentic throughout. It's just that their application, their utilization changes, it adapts over time, and it allows the user to create a new identity.
Yeah, become a richer experience. And just because something may be old doesn't mean it's solely authentic. If we move forward into more contemporary things, you can see this is a project in Miami, and this is using Misha Khan, Gisela Colon, Rashid Johnson. You can see on the left. And this project was informed by the bioluminescence of the ocean there. So when you look at all the components of it, they look like the sea, and they tie these authentic new things into the environment. You can see on the right, and ironically, that's it's Friedman Benda, and of course, the inspiration here is informed by a lot of the participants in Design Miami, Design Basel, Design LA, and we're so proud to be able to use their works in our work as well, as it really makes it much richer. On the right, you can see original Carlo Scarpa work. That kind of kite lamp is from Future Perfect, and that's a Creo table, and of course, Misha Khan. And I think Charles Bernand is here from London, and working with the bioluminescence, this Dawn Bendick glass looks like sea glass and relates to the Gisela Colon, so you can see something new, authentic, can have the same power that something vintage does as well.
So really, I mean, authenticity can be interpreted in many different ways, but I think it ultimately rests on the originality of ideas. And that's why we're absolutely delighted, and I'm sure you all are as well, to be here, to be at the point of the crucible of the innovation of new tendencies, new spirits, new materials, and really just a feeling of innovation.
Now this is so interesting to see the context in a Gardner Asplin's library in Stockholm of that kind of Greek neoclassical light as it transferred into the Tisch residence in New York, which was the former David Rockefeller residence, and the beautiful transition it has, and the authentic object kind of serves the same purpose in the new environment, which is representing the old world, and the old environment back in Stockholm represented the new world. So there's kind of a yin-yang here, which is an interesting relationship. In the same residence, this is a Candela building, And when we were renovating this place, the building department said the solarium was illegal because it was not filed, it wasn't by Felix Candela, or Rosario Candela. So when we did the demolition, we found the blueprints in the wall, and we proved to the building department that in fact the solarium did exist, and it was an aviary. So we populated with Mr. Mitterrand's Lalande birds and Chastel Marichel's mirror there, and so planted the ivy. So this reinforced something from the 1920s, which we resurrected and kind of made it of its original intent. And
so here, here we have an installation that you can see, the colourful installation that is the Galerie Jacques Lacoste, one of the, in fact, I would arguably suggest the premier versatile Parisian-based design gallery dealing with all types of objects, really from the late 19th century until around about the 1960s. This, I believe, Lee, is an installation at your gallery in New York. But it's important to talk about historic objects as well. Objects have a life, they move from A to B. You've seen with the Fornasetti screen panels how they have had a different life, different manifestations, and things can happen to objects over time. They can be altered, they can be adapted, they can be improvised. Chairs will be reupholstered, patterns may evolve. They just need to be understood. And part of our role here at Design Miami, I mean, both of us have been here for a couple of days already, so we arrive ahead of the fair opening. And our diligence and duty is to really ensure that everything that is here at the fair is consistent with expectations. So if it's a piece of contemporary design, that it really ought to be what we would expect it to be. And with historic material, we start getting quite granular with objects and studying finishes, bolts, mechanisms, surfaces, techniques, soldering. And this requires a lot of intuition, a lot of experience, but
a lot of scratch and sniff, actually.
Yeah. But the great thing is I mean, the gallerists that do exhibit here and also in the sister shows in Paris and Miami and Basel, they're a good, diligent group, so it makes our work a lot easier.
What I wanted to add about this, talking about the relationship of the object and space, one might say, how did this palette come about for this installation when you look at what the space was like before? Well, in crawling into the expert Jacques Lacroix's head and his knowledge of history and the author of the Royer books, if you look at the history of the Ars Polaire, which is the teddy bear sofa, which gets great sums at auction, this palette is generated by Royer's original textiles for all the Ars Polaire over history and became a seat for the background of not the Ars Polaire but other objects by very famous French architects and designers. This is a new-ish artist. We have Southern Guild. This is Izzy Wipozoa. This is her first exhibition. She's here also of bronzes, outdoor bronzes. We were so proud to debut her with Southern Guild, and she's somebody to watch as informing a space and making something really sing through her struggle and her whole South African background.
So here we have a photograph of a desk that was designed by Pierre Charot that dates from the late 1920s, early 1930s. It was created for the celebrated building La Maison de Verre in Paris that was created by Pierre Charot and is really one of the architectural masterpieces of the 20th century. Now, this interior is fascinating. It's a really diverse mix of furniture made out of timber, but specifically objects that were made out of sheet metal. Charot is truly interesting, and he's really one of the pioneers of an industrialized aesthetic that begins to then sort of achieve a wider audience in the 1950s. One may think of Jean Prouvé and Charlotte Perriand, but Charot is really the first. And this type of furniture, all of it was handmade, executed by his metalworker, a fellow called Léon d'Albert. And this particular desk was made for Madame d'Alsace and was recently sold at auction for a relatively significant sum. But it's here because it's a useful example of being able to look at objects, analyze them, contextualize them from the original source, and illustrates the kind of diligence that needs to happen when looking at objects. In this case, we know its history, we know where it's been, we know in whose ownership it has remained since new, but also it doesn't ignore the fact that we need to be diligent when looking at objects. I don't want to talk about reimaginings of Pierre Chareau, but these do exist. So when you're looking at an object, you need to know what you're looking at. You need to understand the provenance. Importantly, in the case of this particular desk, understand the scale. It's a very petite desk. But you know, I suppose we just wanted to focus on this because it's representative of the French modern market that is so powerful and that is so important and so valuable to us all.
Also, its context is interesting. I don't know if people know the Maison de Verre here. Everybody know that building? Yeah. Well, the Maison de Verre in Paris, they're very respectful of their history. So the Hotel Particulier, which most of these courtyard buildings were for horses to arrive, they had to maintain the consistent architectural fabric of the city. So when Mr. Chareau did this, he was allowed to create what he wanted inside that facade. And Revolutionary created a steel and glass brick building within the courtyard. And what's so unique about it is this same attitude that he was talking about the desk finds itself in the architecture. So you get this translation of art and architecture into object. And what was also revolutionary was the social-political thing that happened here, and that a doctor was living on one side of it as his office, and the other side was his residence, and they created a kind of nouvelle salon there in steel and glass, which was very revolutionary at the time. You've been there, haven't you?
Yes, yeah.
It's very, very interesting. Now we skip ahead, and contemporary art can inform spaces. So from DMK, we have this Olafur Eliasson. It's representing 24 hours of the day. If you look on the right, each of those, because there's in Scandinavia, there's either too much light or not enough light. I don't know if people know Stephen Sondheim's musical Little Night Music, but the line goes, the sun won't set, it's fruitless to hope or to fret, the hands on the clock turn, but don't sing a nocturne just yet. And this represents all of that time during the day and the expression of light. Juxtaposed against the Anish Kapoor sculpture, it was quite something, as you can see in the oculus there. And then when it was translated to an environment by the ocean, it then reflected the sea, and the sea is so important in Scandinavia, so it was a wonderful juxtaposition of object and furniture and combination thereof. And here you can see by the sea, the sushi mirror from Carpenter's Workshop, made out of like Habanas or flip-flops, if you want, by the Campagna brothers, and the combination of the Vic Muniz, of art, of Super Studios grid, and how they, and the Ken Nolan painting, how they all sort of synthesized by the sea. You want to talk about Super Studio or Campagna brothers?
Yeah, I mean, Super Studio, I mean, there's a really interesting movement that happens in Italy. We've spoken a little bit about Giaponti. Well, I mean, this is the period of Italian reconstruction after the Second World War. I mean, Italy gave rise to probably the most dynamic, sequential series of innovation in the latter part of the 20th century. I mean, after World War II, Italy was somewhat destroyed, but it received funding from the Marshall Plan, the American Marshall Plan, into the 1950s, and this gave rise to real development in Italian design. I mean, it was also supported for export to the United States, so the Italian identity moved very, very quickly, effortlessly into the US. I mean, a lot of the department stores in New York and elsewhere would be showing shows of
And also
of,
you
of
can
Italian
see the
design.
descendants of Fornasetti in this. You know, you see the graphic quality, and Fornasetti invented the transfer system, and now this is available in a formica called laminati, which we've done environments in. So it's gotten very popular again. In fact, at Salone last year, whole pavilions were done in laminati, creating this kind of forced perspective, which goes back to Escher and Piranesi and Fornasetti, and through time, it exists in a kind of Italianate way.
But laminates are actually quite interesting anyway. I mean, laminates are really important. People generally tend to overlook them, but laminates, what one thinks of Memphis, one of the characteristics of Memphis furniture is laminates, and all of it is rather jokingly taken from the Bob Dylan song about being outside of Memphis, but it's referring to the kind of diner furniture that you would have in the 1950s.
Vinyl too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is another job in Florida, but we have Pierre Paulin's work is here. And this was Mark Newsom's benches here. And they were reflecting the kind of tide going in and out of the ocean, both in the Paulo Riva sofas, in the Mark Newsom things, and the movement of the Pierre Poulin, and on the right, of course, the wonderful sushi bench. That's through both Friedman Benda and Carpenter's Workshop. There's also a little Zaha Hadid thing there, and there's another Pierre Poulin chair in the distance. Pierre Poulin's an interesting case now as well.
Yeah, and actually, should anyone be tantalizingly tempted by the example illustrated in the photograph here, there is one available in the exhibition. I mean, alongside a lot of the fantastic pioneering contemporary design galleries that are exhibiting here, it's also worth just really pointing out the Podium gallery, which is above us in this building, and then there's another section scattered in the further reaches of the building. But that's a really well curated survey of historic design and
now that you
some
mentioned
recent
the Podium,
design.
we can go to the kind of elements that are in the Podium, more historic. This is a penthouse in Manhattan. And this combination of things, that's actually a Tenrero table. You had talked about the kind of plan of this reminded you of something.
Yeah, I mean, the Palais Stockley, I mean, one of the great UNESCO World Heritage Sites, one of the most important buildings of the early 20th century, built for a wealthy industrialist just outside of Brussels, Adolf Stockley. But this was really the Gesamtkunstwerk. It was the first building that incorporated or encouraged a holistic identity to the interior, whereby craftsmen in Vienna and in Belgium, because they couldn't sustain the demands that were put upon them, created everything from the furniture to the wall treatments to the cutlery to the lighting. But there's something about the open space here, the atrium, the spacing of the furniture that I suppose echoes that a little bit.
But also, we were lucky enough to get this space did not look like this. It didn't have the balcony, it didn't have a two-story space. So without kind of being a slave to tradition, we kind of reinvented it. And also, when you deconstruct the components in it, those were Rudolf Nureyev's chairs by Joseph Urban. Joseph Urban did the New School. I think he escaped the Holocaust and came to New York. But that's surrounding a round table by Tenrero from Brazil, and then a Sergio Rodriguez desk there, and then the Henningsen lamps up above with Giacometti in the district, and that Tapio Workala wood sculptured. You know about Tapio Workala, of course, this technique.
Yeah, I mean, Finland's really one of the most interesting areas of productivity in the 20th century. And again, it goes down to national identity. National identity and history is something that always facilitates innovation in design. I mean, Finland sought independence from Russia, having already gained independence from Sweden the century before. So I think it's about 1921, Finland becomes independent. And there's great state support and sponsorship for creativity. People like Tapio Workala, Timo Saapaneva, Alvar Aalto before him, all of them were exhibiting at the international trade shows, specifically the Triennales in Milan of the early 1950s.
But what was fascinating is there was a kind of trend in the international style, which Philip Johnson and Henry Russell Hitchcock named at MoMA. But they kind of turned their back on contextual modernism, which was really going on in these kind of countries, which Vincent Scully said they were pandering to craft, which he took back many years later. But if you look at that work of the sculpture, he invented out of these plywood sheets, he made these sheets of plywood and glue and sheets of plywood, and he made these blocks, and then he would carve through the blocks to get these organic things. And Finland was the only country that didn't have a monarchy in Scandinavia, so I always view nature as their monarchy, as evidenced here.
But it also illustrates new materials. I mean, plywood is a substance that evolved alongside the aviation industry, just as aluminium did here in Los Angeles in the 1930s.
And in the Podium, the Gerard Summer chairs here are a great example of plywood.
Yeah, you'll see it upstairs, 1934 chair by the British designer Gerald Summers. And to my mind, it's one of the best chairs ever, because it is created out of a single sheet of plywood that is bent and cut to create a structure. There are no seams, no joints.
Speaking of authenticity, somebody was looking and said, it's crooked. Well, it earned it.
Yeah.
Because it's a single torque piece of plywood, so that's what makes it authentic.
But also, yeah, it's crooked, and the reason it's crooked is because you can often tell if someone was left-handed or right-handed when they used a piece of furniture, because through routine there will be sort of pressure placed on a consistent point, and that will help evolve a personalized identity for the object. So I think the one upstairs might have had some use from a left-handed person.
It was a lefty.
Yeah.
The lefty.
So, sorry, this just goes on about authenticity has got multiple interpretations,
Yes.
multiple meanings.
Yes.
But,
This is an interesting contemporary residence showing the kind of relationship contemporary art can have to contemporary design as well. Because I think contemporary design and historic design has been usurped by the contemporary art market and is not valued enough. And if you look at the Rashid Johnson painting here and the Gallery All console by Mad Architects and the John Hogan glass and the mirror by Future Perfect, there's beautiful relationships between reflections, the painting, and the dialogue that happens with even the suggestion of a human figure there. On the right here, on the left, and Simon can address this, those chairs were from the Swedish pavilion at the World's Fair in the 30s in New York.
So again, I mean, it's great to see objects being reassessed, reinterpreted, repositioned to create a new identity. So again, this fulfills our interpretation of a narrative of authenticity. Mm-hmm. The thing is always real. It always has been real. It continues to be real. It was never not real, but it alters its identity through successive ownership.
It makes it relevant in a way,
yeah.
You know, not mothballs. And we look at the Serge Mouilly table there, which echoes the circulation at the corner. It turns the corner of the circulation, the Hans Wegner chair, and the beautiful Joseph Different lamp from Pierre-Marie Giraud in Belgium in the corner. Look at the size of that. And those are Rita Ackerman paintings. Again, the dialogue between art, architecture, and object is very key. I'm not supposed to show this next picture, but this is just a shot I took 3 days ago. That's Rogan Gregory's fertilization being birthed out of the ceiling. You can see there. So we created this kind of trying to integrate the object in the environment and create the environment specific to the object to inform it rather than just something. It now is actually looking like it's coming out of the ceiling itself. And Rogan's very interesting. He's featured a lot here. He's with R20 and he's Los Angeles based, so it's nice to have a local poet represented as well. This is a house in Long Island which kind of splits open to views and to light, and the architecture informs the interior and the interior informs the architecture. So when you look at, there's the Prouvé wall, this kind of deconstruction of planes, and we can turn it over to, there's the Ars Polaire.
Yeah, let's just talk about an Ars Polaire for a moment. I mean, I'm sure many of us know what an Ars Polaire is. It's a polar bear chair designed by Jean Royer, produced in relatively limited quantities from the 1940s onwards. They are very valuable. They make a lot of money. I mean, the settees will be 800, 1.2 million, 1.5 million upwards. Depends on the upholstery. Normally it's a mohair upholstery. Some of them may have been...
Actually, I have a funny story about the authenticity of the upholstery. When you get them, they're a little bit ratty, some of them. And some of them are really ratty. So when we were working with one, I thought, what textile could go on that? I remember as a kid, I had a Steiff animal collection. And I remember it had this alpaca mohair. I contacted the alpaca company in Germany and turned the source over to everyone who supplies it, and now it's the ubiquitous source for all the Ars Polaire.
Yeah, and
from a Steiff.
Yeah, teddy bears. But again, with authenticity, I mean, how can one determine the authenticity of an object that is 100% upholstery? How does one do it? So this goes back to the points. First of all, we need to focus on provenance, where the thing has been. Ideally, there might be sort of historic photographs of the piece, or it's been handed down within the family. But there's certain things that we need to do as part of the vetting committee. First of all, we start with the feet, because normally the feet are the only thing that's sort of visible, that's part of the original structure. The feet of these things are made in a very specific way. They're oak blocks, but delivered in a very specific manner. But then the other funny thing that we have to do is we have to sort of press into the flesh of the settee and feel the spines, because there's a specific frame, timber frame for these settees, and if you feel one and there's too many spines in it, you know you need to probably look elsewhere for an example.
Well, it's gotten a little bit oversubscribed now because Goop is trying to do their version of it. But the original ones, if you really deconstruct it, have a cloisonné label in blue and white under it, which I've seen, which is amazing, and they're numbered, the first batch of them. So that would be another key, but we dissect these things because they have value and provenance. We want to make sure they're real, and everything in this wonderful exhibition is real, and we're very proud of that. we should talk about, well, Perriand, we have the Perriand table here. But again, in this architecture, the deconstruction of the space, the circulation of the space is defined by the shapes of the furniture. So that's a Perriand table that echoes the corner and transition of the building, and that is from Jus again. And that is Charles Zublena, a Swiss architect, with this arch, like the tunnels in Switzerland, that make the transition of the geometry. And on the left is a veneer of wood on the wall that looks like the water brushing up against the tide, against the sea, creating sediments, and the Matthias Bengston chair articulates those kind of horizontal sediments as a site plan there. But the Perriand market is another interesting market which we run into, and the Prouvé market, which you may want to talk about.
Which, by no curious twist of fate, is that they're all French. I mean, the French designers are really at the forefront of the historic market. It's quite fascinating to see, but there's a great diversity of expression led by Jean Royer, Charlotte Perriand, Jean Prouvé. Following in the slipstream Matagot, there's great ceramics.
This is
yes, of course. Here we have some of the real highlights of the French mid-century moment. I mean, furniture made for the Maison de Tunisie that was part of the Parisian University. But these are all objects that are now highly sought after. They require thorough diligence. You'll find an example of a compass table upstairs in the podium. Mm-hmm. But this furniture is extremely popular. It's quite fascinating how, I suppose I started in this business in the mid-1990s, and I don't think any of us would have really expected that this aspect of the French mid-century identity would become so appealingly internationalized.
But it seemed appropriate with contemporary art for some reason.
Well, there's an aspect of neutrality to it,
mm-hmm.
And there's also the perception of value.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ultimate, in a way, of some kind of a shabby chic, because the more beaten up a Prouvé chair is, the more the flaked the paint is, the more appealing it becomes. And so, in a way, it's the ultimate.
Although I had a story of a client who wanted something, and it was that perfect patina, and he said, "I don't like it. It looks old." And I said, "Well, that's because it's got the patina." He said, "It may be old, but it's new to me. Refinish it." So he wanted it all sparkling clean.
Mm.
Actually, that's the dormitory room in La Tunisie with all those components in it. There were like 11 of these rooms like this, or 12 of these rooms that had this beautiful construction in it. And then we would like to sum up with one of the great artists of our time, Porky Heffer, who's at Southern Guild. We have his beautiful Yoko. I think it's Yoko that's here. Yoko that's here. And he's somebody to watch, really authentic, unique in his time, and we're very proud to have him. You want to mention how his great sense of humor. This is a show he did in New York called No Bats, No Chocolate, because it's for children. And I remember as a kid watching the Leonard Bernstein Young concert series and thinking, when I grow up, I'd like to do something for kids too. So thanks to Southern Guild, we were able to create this. We had 46-year-olds from Buckle My Shoe come in the other day and inhabit these things. That's the ladybug and the wildebeest, and there's the crocodile. Now, the name No Bats, No Chocolate comes from the bats pollinate the cocoa plant, and that's how you get chocolate. And crocodile tears, the crocodile's not crying because he's sad, he's crying because he's eating. So when you hear the term crocodile tears, so Porky and Southern Guild found a way to teach not only children but adults, these endangered species, what their purpose was and what they have to offer in his unique view. And we go back to Fornasetti, and we'd like to open up for questions.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably sense that ours is a fairly elliptical conversation around notions of authenticity. Authenticity can exist in its plastic sense, its malleable sense, from the point of view of interpretation. But also it's about being who you want to be as well. I mean, all of these objects travel through time and space, and they will, I suppose, skirt our existence, and it's up to us to decide what we want to do with these objects and how we want to live with them and what we want those objects to say about us. So authenticity is not really saying if it's real or not. It's, I suppose it is in a way, but it's about creating something that is true to oneself. Is that object true to itself? And is our use of that object appropriate to how we really think we want to be?
It's a very personal experience because I find if in the inanimate object, if it's authentic, it becomes animate today to me, and I can feel the person behind it. And as Americans, we theoretically have a political democracy, but we have a design democracy, which makes us so unique. So as an American, to be able to bring all these cultures together in the same space or in your own head and embrace them is the American way. And I'm very proud to be part of Design Miami, Design Basel, Design the World, Design whatever it's going to be, because that's what we celebrate here, and that's the joy. So if you want to open up to questions. Anybody have any? Yes?
So what do you all think about what do you all think about what's been going on lately in the press about people sort of reinterpreting or selling pieces that are in the style of, or they're actually kind of blurring the lines for their clients? Because not all clients are not all clients, are collectors and have this knowledge. So there's, we've been having these issues with designers blurring the lines.
Well, I think as part of the committee and as professionals, we are perpetual students, and what we learn, we have to perpetually share as a teacher. So in our small way, we try to celebrate the authentic and steer away from those kind of things and not support them in a way, and support the authentic.
Are you thinking of anything in specifically?
I know what she's thinking of, yes.
Well, there's been a big scandal in the press lately because some Donald Judd works were misrepresented. And, I'm from an older generation of the design world, and I am, dedicated to provenance, but I just feel like it's being lost. And hopefully, we can inspire younger designers or, kind of social media creative designers.
Technology is part of this too.
To have more
AI,
respect.
with accessibility, there's always going to be iterations and versions of things, and you just have to steer clear and stay as true as you can to be it, because I don't think you can avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, the companion really to authenticity is transparency, and without transparency, things become murky and opaque and ambiguous. So it is the responsibility of everyone that is sort of serious and committed about these aspects of this world.
The standards we have here, for example, in things that claim to be something, they have to have the information, the provenance, the original history of it in order to pass the mustard here, and that's what we're so proud of, what we're able to do in the vetting committee.
And that won't always be present, and when that happens, we then rely upon technical expertise and analysis, and we get quite detailed. I mean, we understand what kinds of materials are used in particular ways, or how a particular designer artist might have soldered, or how the gilding should be, or what kind of glass would be used on things in the 1930s and 40s. So there's a variety of aspects, but transparency is extremely important. And when there's clones or imitations or appropriations, that is the disfigurement of transparency.
But I also feel there's a personal violation of doing that, and I feel the presence of the authentic and trying to defend that artist or that person when I look at things and celebrate them and protect them, protect their legacy and so forth.
Well, I hope you two are mentoring a younger design generation, because I'm so afraid this will be lost with time. But thank you for the work that you do. Thank you.
Archaeology is important.
Please, more questions.
Yeah, one more.
Mm-hmm.
If we examine like Char de Gare as a case study, where pieces are being exported at scale and copied, where is the line between the authentic of, say, the same materials being used, maybe a fragment of the original connotations being added to or repaired to create a piece, and then it goes onto the market, versus something that's exported maybe 40, 50 years ago by like Patrick or something of that nature?
Yeah, that's a really, really opaque market.
It's a great question, actually, because there's no answer.
Yeah, and I mean, all I would say is there's more Char de Gare furniture on the market now than there was 20 years ago, which
It's
is
cloning itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it can be very, very difficult. I mean, there's old timbers that are used and reused, and this idea of bricolage and bodging pieces back together has become part of the mythical personality of Chandigarh, in that many in the market will expect to see a piece that has been cobbled together out of bits and pieces because that's what they think it is supposed to look like, because a mythology has been evolved around it suggesting hard use is a sign of authenticity, whereas it probably isn't. I mean, the pieces weren't that abused. There's 1,000 stories of parts of furniture and things dumped by the side of the road, but it's all smoke and mirrors. And ultimately, one has got to, when one can, discern details that are hopefully going some small way to a reassurance of authenticity. The first thing I look at with Chandigarh furniture is the tips of the feet on chairs. I mean, if a chair's been used, then the grain gets compressed and it almost turns glassy. So if a piece of furniture has got crisp edges to the toes of the feet, if the grain is still porous, that really isn't a good sign.
There's a very interesting example with the Mies van der Rohe chair, when it was knocked off by everybody, Palizzetti, and somehow Knoll won the case in perpetuity to be the authentic and the sole creator of it. I don't know how they did that. I don't think there's a backer behind the Chandigarh that could do that, but Knoll was able to do that and put many people out of business from selling that.
You're talking about the Barcelona chair?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was part of war reparations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we like it, we'll have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yes?
In the conversation of brands like the relationship between brands like Vitra and Herman Miller, where they're both producing sort of like similar works with the same kind of, I guess I would say, authenticity, but they're not necessarily identical.
But they're sanctioned by the families and so forth, and I'm not against authentic continuation of something. It doesn't have the patina, but it doesn't mean that all those Perrier cabinets at Casina aren't beautiful unto themselves.
Right, but I mean more specifically in pieces like the Vitra is producing one version, whereas Herman Miller is producing a different version of the same chair.
I think Rolf Feldbaum he acquired the license to produce and distribute Eames furniture in Europe as opposed to the US. So he was really the European arm of the manufacture and distribution of those designs from the 60s onwards. So there's a sort of sibling familiarity between the two companies.
But another example, speaking of Vitra, is Artec. Because Artec never stopped producing many of the things, and they're still producing them. And they're still handmade, and they're still a small company. So if you want something authentic that's never gone out of production, Artec's a great source. It informs a thing, it's beautiful, it's alto, it's bent plywood, and it's still the original. I mean, the patina on the older ones is nicer, but it isn't blasphemous or thinking you're going to go downwardly mobile by getting, a tank chair now.
Mm. Which, in a way, going back to the Rietveld cabinets we had at the very beginning, I mean, neither of those two cabinets were made in the 1950s as the original, because the original no longer exists. However, they are still the originals, because they were produced in the lifetime under the direction of the architect and by his dedicated cabinet maker. So there can be multiple versions of originality. There doesn't just have to be one.
Well, also Benjamin Paulin, his dad, he's continuing to make things, and they're still beautiful too. So I encourage people to support that. And Artifort companies like that with Jeffrey Harcourt's furniture, they're still making the same things. So there is continuous authenticity going on, and not just vintage authenticity.
Mm. I'm really interested in more questions. Thank you.
An original Perrier. Do you think there's anything wrong with encouraging a client to buy the Casina re-edition?
No.
Yeah.
No, we're using the Tokyo benches. They're really nice, a lot. They aren't exactly the same, but they're still beautiful. They're a valid design, and they're supporting the family. They're beautiful. In fact, we have two here in Los Angeles we installed 2 days ago.
And the originals, I mean, they do evolve into being museum objects. I mean, the earliest ones, they use a fabric called Eisengarn, that's a cotton woven with a metal filament, and that doesn't last. So if you want the object to remain in its integrity, it's best to have it as an ornament, which is not really what we always encourage people to do with furniture. Enjoy it and live with it and use it. become one
In
with
this
it.
case, we took 2 Tokyo benches and put them together as almost like a coffee table, and then we put some cushions on it, so it becomes a kind of centerpiece, but it's sort of like the Kontiki raft in the middle of the space. And those are the Copacabana chairs that's the original patina from Matago. Matago's an interesting story because Gooby has now bought the rights to the Matago things.
And if you happen to take a trip to Marrakesh and want to walk around the antiques districts, you will be able to find any Matago design that your heart might desire. All freshly made, but looking really ancient. They're really good at patinating them.
Actually, there was a gallery in Paris selling the Royer sconces, and they didn't know the door was open to the gallery, and I was looking for the proprietor, and I went upstairs, and there were 75 unpainted rods that looked like that. They were run out of town, actually.
You had a question at the back.
Yeah, I do. It's probably multifaceted. And I guess it originally comes from looking at the art world, and with designers now who may start making their own work, and then as they get more successful, joining and then establishing a workshop, which we see in the art world a lot, that's happening now in the design world. And then also the difference in authenticity from those artist designers who choose to always make their own, and those that design and have other people make.
It's Kuhn syndrome.
Yeah. But then there's also, I mean, you're giving examples, historic examples where they've worked with a workshop. And do you see anything different in authenticity in contemporary design between those that make and those that design?
I don't necessarily. I mean, I think something is either expressive or it isn't, and I think the actual mechanism that creates it is secondary. Yeah, and so many of the objects that we're looking at here, they were designed for utopian notions of serial production and better living. They were democratic in their aspirations. The desire was that as many people as possible should live with these objects because they could improve one's existence. So in a way, the process that evolves the object is always interesting, but I wouldn't allude greater importance to one method over the other.
I think it's the artist's discretion as their expression of their work. I wouldn't judge that way. Does that mean that a Koons isn't worth something? You know, or Damien Hirst? Well, maybe not Damien Hirst. Anybody else? No. Again, I want to thank Jen Roberts and Basic Space and the Design Miami crew, some of which are here today, who've been so supportive and wonderful, and what an honor it is to be here. And thank you all for coming. We've had a great time.
Yeah, and absolutely make the most out of it. This is a really special event. We're all really privileged to be here. I'm glad that you're here, and just make the most of it. There's so much to discover and learn.
Well, also Ashley Harrison, who's our curator, did a wonderful job. She's over here. We should give her a big hand.
Yeah.
Ashley. So she's authentic. Okay.
Thank you very much.